morning. Hey, welcome to Marshfield's Old School Times. I'm Lyndall Fraker. We're here this morning. A little bit different time this week, 10 a.m. with two very special guests. And I think today's going to be a real treat. And we're really honored to have with us today Pat Abbott. Pat, welcome.
Welcome to you.
And her daughter Susan. Susan, welcome.
Thank you.
Pat is a national treasure. Now, she probably wouldn't agree with me, but those of us that know her knows that that is true, and we're really honored to have her here today. We're excited to be able to listen and hear some of the stories of her time in Marshfield growing up, and then being in business on the square for 55 years right here in Marshfield on Business Loop, Route 66. So it's an exciting morning for us, and again, welcome today, and we're going to have some fun. So I've got Logan Fraker here with me today as my producer again. Logan, thanks for coming in and getting up out of bed this morning early. And always, as always, thank Dennis Beck for our introductory music. Time Flies, a great song by another MHS grad. Went to school with Susan and I back here in the 70s. So with that, we're going to get started, Pat, because you've got a lot of information, and we're going to squeeze it out of you this morning.
Well, you may squeeze it out, or you may have to ask her.
Okay. So Pat Abbott, you came into this world in
September the 4th, 1926.
September 4, 1926. So you are 97 years old.
That's right.
And you're proud of that. And probably just so much knowledge and so much information in that mind of yours that we want to try to have you share with us. So is now what I think I mentioned this the other night. You know, there was another event that occurred in 1926, and that is that Route 66 was born. So you are the same age as Route 66, and in 3 years we're going to celebrate that centennial of that highway and your birthday, your birth as well. So be ready for that. Okay, be prepared. All right. So let's just start from the beginning. You were born and raised right here in Marshfield, and I'd like for you to just take the mic and just tell us a little bit about that.
About being
Your
raised here.
your folks, and your family, and so forth.
My folks were Marshall Lane and Chloe Wingo, and they were married. And I don't know what you want me to tell you, but I've had a wonderful time. Good friends.
Yeah.
H.H. McNabb was my high school superintendent. Chris Beatty was principal. And I liked everybody. Good friendship. My voice is leaving me.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you want me to say, Lyndall, but...
Did you have any siblings?
What?
Did you have any brothers or sisters?
No. No, I didn't want any. I was spoiled rotten, an only child and only grandchild.
And you lived where at here in town?
Right on Washington Street, across from the Smiths, if you remember them, right across the street. I can't think who lived, the Vanises lived on that street.
Fosters.
Hmm?
Fosters. The Fosters.
Fosters. Mae Foster, that big old house, just one house down from the square on Washington.
That would be John and Carolyn Thompson's
Yes,
house, correct?
yes.
Yeah.
And they had a barn right in the back of our house, going down the alley in the back. And Mae and her sister, I believe it was the sister that lived with her, and she milked cows. She raised chickens. Chickens woke us up every morning, and the railroad track was just right on next to her. Wonderful neighbors.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the Smiths. That was the big house where Dee Dee Hamilton is now. And your house was
right
in
across the street.
Show Me's parking lot. Show Me Power has a parking lot
right.
there, and
we
actually
sold out to
Show Me Power.
Okay, thank you.
And we tore that house down. Actually, I was involved in tearing that house down a few years ago that you were raised in. So you
And
go ahead.
the Stocktons lived in the alley right next to it.
that'd be Don Stockton's
and they
dad.
had the
and that's-
packing house, and
Yeah.
so the whole family was raised here.
And I think Mr. Stockton, was he involved in the canning business
Yes,
as well
Frank Stockton.
during the Depression
Mhm.
when people were having to buy
And that's
raise
where the
tomatoes?
new building's going
Dollar
up now
General,
down
the new
there.
Dollar General down
Uh-huh.
there on Commercial Street. So you would obviously this was the school you attended, elementary,
You
all
bet.
12 years. Did you walk to school or ride a bus?
Oh, walked.
That's what I figured.
Mhm.
Just checking. Probably took your lunch, packed your lunch. I'm
Packed
sure.
my lunch when I didn't go to town. I walked up to my dad was in the produce business, and there was a little cafe right across from it that the Chapmans and I can't think of
Yeah.
it. What?
Pearl Bell. Pearl Bell.
Yes.
Pearl Bell and Laura Chapman. Mr. Chapman worked at
Mhm.
the creamery.
Yes, you did.
And your dad's produce business was where the Marshfield Mill is.
That's right. They sold out to him.
So, was he already in the milling as well, doing produce and milling as well? No,
just-
okay, just
mhm.
produce like a
Sold
like a store.
furs and bought eggs. And did you ever candle an egg?
I don't believe I've ever candled an egg.
Well,
That's
I
one
have.
thing I haven't done.
I can't remember. I can remember the string down from the ceiling and a light bulb, and you looked in there, and if the yolk looked all right, that egg was all right.
It was
And
good.
we put it on the semis that took it into St. Louis.
So he would buy the eggs from the local farmers, buy the furs,
That was what was keeping it going.
and
going.
produce too. He bought produce from the local farmers.
What?
He bought produce from the local farmers too.
Yes,
And they
all
shipped
of
it.
them. Mhm.
Did he sell the produce and eggs there retail to the locals as well?
No, we bought.
You bought and wholesale.
And
Okay,
Holston.
gotcha. And so your mom and dad, did your mother help or she stay at home pretty
She
much?
stayed home. She
Uh,
was stayed home mom.
Did you go down to the produce business much or
As much as I could.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I loved it.
yeah, which was a walking distance to school and a walking distance home.
It's
So
right where the
you
mill
could
is
walk.
now, and the office hasn't changed. It's the same office
Oh,
that my
is it?
dad had.
I see.
And then Sinclair Station right next to it, he had it.
You had that, and then after you got married, you and Bob ended up with
Yes,
that
yes.
bulk, the Sinclair bulk business. And we'll get into that too. So growing up in Marshfield, you had the Ritz Theater, right?
You bet.
And was it obviously when it was originally built, it was built for stage, but they converted it to movies in the 20s, I think. But so they were showing movies and so forth.
That's all the entertainment we had.
Yeah, yeah. And all the business was in around the square. There was no spur out there yet. As we talked about there, Route 66 was born in 1926, the same year as Pat, and so they did kind of go around the square with the highway, but they still had the city route or the business loop. So that's where all the activity was. You always turned off to come through town. But even then, the Y out there at Washington and Jackson was the edge of town.
That's right.
Even Carl Young hadn't moved to town yet,
That's
and
right.
there was nothing out there. So, so tell us about some of the other establishments around the square, like eating joints, cafes. What where would you go? Shop, grocery
Earl
stores,
Shields.
Pharmacy.
Shields Pharmacy. There was a grocery store over on the opposite corner, and I can't remember the name of the.
On the other side of Washington from Shields, you mean on the east side of the square?
And
Was Tyndall's Groceries? Where were they?
yes, Mylands, yes.
Yeah.
The other kids could charge, and my dad wouldn't let me charge and get anything. I can remember that easy. I still love my friends, but they got by with it, and I didn't get to.
Who were some of your
Emma
friends?
Muzzy.
Who?
Emma Muzzy.
Emma Muzzy.
Had the cafe.
That was her mother had the cafe, or Emma had
No,
the
she
cafe.
had the cafe.
Oh, I
That
see.
was the name of
Oh,
it.
I see. Yeah,
And-
Muzzy's Cafe.
And they had a big pinball machine there. And one day, my folks and my grandparents had always saved Indian head pennies. And I decided I was going to take all my friends up there. So we took all my Indian head pennies and put them in that little pinball machine That was the end of it, and that
Uh-oh.
wasn't the end of the results.
Mom and Dad didn't like that too well.
Mm-mm. Well, I'd been a millionaire by now.
Well, yeah, what would those Indian head pennies be worth today? Muzzy's Cafe, it's where John Thompson's new building is
Yes.
there on the square. What other places can you recall? Was Johnny Andrews
A.D.
in-
Roper,
A.D. Roper?
Oddfellows
Yeah.
Lodge climbed up the steps over there by A.D. Roper. I can remember was the bank there then? No, not that. It might not have been there.
It was on the
And
other side.
then
That Webster Electric was up.
Webster
Different.
Electric was on the
I
corner.
can remember seeing them walk up the.
And just for those that don't remember Roper's, tell them what Roper's store, what all they carried.
They carried everything.
Yeah.
Anybody that wanted to sew or just practical things. Good
Clothing.
store.
Mhm.
They had a brother store in another town. There was 2
Mhm.
brothers, and of course, we know the family real well.
Mhm. Dave.
Mhm.
And then your grocery stores, you had the one you mentioned on the east side, but then there was
Mingus was one of them.
Mhm.
Mingus, she said.
Mingus, M-I-N.
A grocery store.
Over on the corner.
What about
across
Phelan's?
from the sweet shop.
Yeah,
And,
that catty corner from the street shop.
yes.
And then next to that was Phelan's grocery store. Were they there yet? Where Rose Phelan has the building there
I can't answer.
between the Ritz and because I know there was a grocery store
Yes,
there.
yes, I think they
Yeah.
were.
Mary's Variety probably wasn't open yet.
No,
When you
but
were
I
in
know
school.
the family real well. And I
They-
knew when they came here, and
They came.
everybody, all the kids went down there to
Mhm.
the pinball machines
Mhm.
and buy their tablets for school
Yeah.
and pencils.
Penny candy.
Lovely
Even Susan
family.
and I bought penny candy there.
Well,
Even Susan and I bought
Yeah.
penny candy
well, they
when we
were
were
lovely
kids.
people to
Yeah, they
begin
were.
with, the
Yeah.
Phelans.
So you grow up around the square, and then you graduate from high school in 1943.
Got married.
Got married first.
Really. That wasn't the thing to do back then.
And that was what
I
month?
fooled 'em.
What month?
October.
October of 43. So you had turned 17.
That's the wedding picture.
And ignorant.
Huh?
And ignorant.
He actually came home on leave and they got married.
Oh my goodness. I'm going to show this picture. It's a little goofy when we do it this way, but you got to see this picture. There's Bob and Pat. She's 17. How old was Bob?
He was 3 years older.
So 20.
Mm-hmm.
And he was already in the service.
Mm-hmm.
Came home, and you got married, and he shipped out the next day or a day or
Well,
two later.
in the meantime, he got a scholarship playing basketball.
That was before.
Okay. Now he went to Conway.
He
High
went to
school.
Conway School, and he got a scholarship to Southwest Baptist, and he went.
To
Was it
play
a year?
to play basketball?
Yeah,
he
play
went
basketball.
He went 2 years.
And then he went into the service.
So he did get to go to college 2 years.
Yes.
And they were an associate's degree school then.
Correct.
Did he get that degree?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then he decided to enlist because he was going to be drafted
Yeah,
anyway.
right.
So they decided to enlist.
Yeah.
And so he enlisted, went to Farragut, Idaho for training, and then came back home. They got married, and then he shipped out for 18 months.
18 months. Now, did you not see him for 18 months?
Well, one little trip to San Francisco.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Talk about your trip. How long had you been married then?
Not very long, and I was what you call a greenhorn.
I understand.
And my dad put me on the train and rented a car. I guess that's what you call it, rent anyway. And I stayed in that until I got to San Francisco, one way or the other. It might have,
Either the train
I
or the
can't
car.
remember switching trains.
Yeah.
But anyway, I got to San Francisco, and I might bring up Warren Johnson's name.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the Army, excuse me, and he knew Bob was coming to San Francisco, so he got us a place to stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
You couldn't find a place to stay. And we wouldn't have had a place, and I couldn't have gone if it hadn't been for him.
Yeah.
I'm losing my voice. But
There's some water.
we really appreciated that.
I bet. I bet. That is really a neat story. I mean, that's just really neat to think that you
Oh,
had only been married a short time. After your wedding time there weekend, then you didn't get to see him, and then you got on a train a little later and went out there, and you were only out there 2, 3, 4 days,
yes.
and then
He
you had to
shipped
turn
right-
right around and come back.
And he turned right around and went back to the
Yeah. Wow.
neighbor. And while he was gone, I never did mention this to you. I worked for Lester Garst.
Phone
And
company.
people took Lester Garst. He was very stern, but he was the best boss that anybody could have had. And excuse me, I'm sorry. Ruby Jane Birchfield was his secretary. Anybody would remember those two people.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. I remember them as kids, and then of course he went to the Methodist Church where we went, Mr. Garst and
I
Mrs.
knew the
Garst,
whole
and she was
family.
really nice lady too. So I've got another picture I want to show you. So many of you have heard us talk about the old gym that was in the lower level of the East Wing, and that's the gym that when you went to school, the boys played basketball, and girls, I guess, played volleyball and PE or whatever. But she brought me a picture this morning. Is a school dance in that gym, and I'll tell you, this is the first picture that I've seen of the actual gym floor, of the inside of that gym. This is a classic. I'm really glad you brought it. This is the East Wing gym, and now, Susan, can you point out Bob and Pat there?
Right here.
Right there.
Right there.
There's Bob and Pat, and of course, he was Conway guy. But you were still in high school here in Marshfield, and you were able probably to invite him, right, to come and be your escort for the dance.
You bet.
That's Laverne Stockton. Right?
Laverne Stockton,
Mhm.
okay.
Junior and Ruth Dawson. Ruth was a sister to John Bell Greer, but I don't know who they are in that picture.
Right.
I don't.
Right. All dressed up in their ties and nice dresses. And
That's the only one dance that I'd ever been to in the gym or since.
yeah. Well, that's a great picture because we've often wondered exactly what it looked like, and that gives us a good idea. You can see the bleachers there on the side and shuffleboard on the floor here, so appreciate that. Okay, so you guys, Bob completes his service and then comes back to Marshfield, and you all, where did you live? Where did you first start set up housekeeping after he came home? I assume you lived with your folks while he was gone, right? Then where did you take?
She lived with her folks.
Yeah,
They
right, but
lived in that
Bob
one
did,
house.
but Bob stayed there with you, okay? And then he got into business, and your father-in-law helped him get started, or were partners, right? And tell us about that.
That was the station and the pay.
This is really a funny story.
That's why we're here.
We had, I can't remember, I think it's 4 cabins at the back. And my mother and I were delegated to take care of the cabins. And I advise you, if you ever rent a cabin, don't treat them like that, because people are really rude and nasty.
I imagine.
But we didn't mind it, and the Greyhound bus went through there, I imagine about 2 times a day, maybe 4, but Bob sold the bus tickets, he sold the gas, and we cooked. And there was 2 couples that came in every day. They never missed a day. So I guess their wives never cooked. I don't know. But anyway, John and Bess Hosmer. And John and Bess came in every day and ate lunch. And they always wore brown. Never another shirt. Everything was brown. And John Hosmer never had the cash. He always paid by a check. I was younger. I wasn't used to that. And then Walter and Lucy Tyndall, well, that would be Gene Greer's
Mhm.
grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they were just lovely people.
Yeah.
They
Great customers.
they had the
Yeah.
cash,
Yeah.
and that's unheard of eating out there. And they never cooked it.
Yeah,
Because I'm
every
sure
day.
they cooked
Yeah,
at home,
yeah.
but they never missed one
Mhm.
day eating.
But out of all of the establishments, Marshfield had several cafes, right, in those days.
Yes, yes.
They
We
always
were the
came to
best.
yours. That's right. That's right.
I'm sure we
that's a
didn't
neat-
suit everybody.
That's great. That's great. So
And
the
Earl
bus
Bell and Laura Chapman cooked donuts and pies in the back, and they were the best in town. I'll tell you for sure.
and tell everybody where this was located again, just to make sure
Well,
they'll
I don't
understand.
know what the name of it
Yeah.
is now, but you can tell them how it's located.
We kind of know it as the Y,
Yes.
where Washington and Jackson meet. And
Yes.
there's a convenience store there now, Country Express or whatever they call it now, and you said there were cabins
In the
behind,
back,
and then a
behind
little
Bob
station.
sold-
Mhm.
That was back when the highway was being built too, and he got up at 5 every morning and serviced the gas on the highway. And
You're talking about 44 or the
Yes,
bigger
yes.
highway over
That
there.
was a
Yeah,
little bit later.
yeah.
Mhm.
and I got up and cooked.
And clean cabins.
Wow, that's something.
And really, I guess that was the only place to go after ball games. But we could not get to bed before 1 o'clock probably every morning because we closed at 12. And Marshfield
You closed
was
it
great to us.
and you opened at what time?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock next morning.
My goodness.
And Bob started selling Greyhound bus tickets about the same time
Mm-hmm.
because he had to get up and service the station and do that.
When we had Don Roast on a couple weeks ago, he mentioned that the boys around town here would go out there and they would catch a ride to Springfield on a
Yeah.
Friday night or something. Thumb a ride, and
Uh-huh.
that's where they would do it there at the Y, which was the edge of town then, of course. That's great. Great story. Now, when he bought that, there was a small building there and the cabins, kind of a small service station, and then you all built the new cafe. What became the bus station and the cafe then?
It was closed up, didn't it?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is now.
Yeah, and then I think sometime in the '60s, that building was tore down, and they built the building that's there now, which was built, as I recall, as a standard station, and then became a convenience store later. But so the building that you all worked from is not there, but I can barely remember that building as a kid in the '60s being there still,
Remember it well.
and it was still the bus station, I think, even there for a while. I recall, but. So you and Bob on Friday, or did you ever? I guess you must have had a night off every now and then. You mentioned that you maybe hung out down at, or maybe that's when you were still in high school down at
Luganville's.
Luganville's. Tell us about Luganville's.
Well, it was a mom and pop thing. Mr. and Miss Luganville ran it, and all the kids from Conway, Niagara, and Marshfield, and we'd go dance there, and they cooked just hamburgers and things, but now we would probably call it a honky tonk. But there wasn't any drinking going on,
Yeah.
I'll assure you. And it was just a fun place to be and a good place for the kids to go.
And it was on Old Route
Right hand side
66.
going to Niagara.
Yeah, I think maybe across from there's a church there or two, and so that not too far out of Marshfield. Then.
That's right.
Yeah. And then you mentioned too, and I've heard my dad talk. Mr. Johnny Luganville was their son.
And he
And
was killed.
He was killed. Was a car wreck.
While we were all
Yeah.
kids together.
Yeah, and he was a really good basketball
Yeah,
player.
very.
Played basketball with probably against
Saw.
Bob
Mhm.
because Bob would have been Conway
Mhm.
and Marshfield would have played them back then. Okay, so you now you worked at the phone company while Bob was in the service. You had because you had to help
Loved
him.
every minute of it.
Yeah, you had to help him at the station after that. Then in 1950, you decided to get into business yourself.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Well, Wanda and Paul Becker came to me and asked me if I would be interested in going into business with them. And of course, I didn't have any money, and Bob hadn't been home long enough. But my mother had saved her money, and she gave me $10,000. I remember.
Really? Now your dad had passed away, young, fairly young, right?
Mhm.
He was 50. Okay, and
Well, I can tell you also he flew an airplane.
he did.
Did I ever tell you that?
No, tell us about that.
Well, Hobart Guthrie and Herman Pierce and my dad bought a plane together,
Mhm.
and they kept it out at the golf course out
Mhm.
there. And I was the only one that would go up with. My dad didn't do anything like that. He was just getting in the plane and driving a few miles. But
Yeah.
anyway, but Hobart Guthrie was kind of an accomplished pilot,
Uh
and he would take me up and do spins and all with me.
Oh,
and I
wow.
loved it.
huh.
But the main thing that I was going to tell you, they flew one. I can't remember what day of the week, of course, anything. But I had gone up with Hobart Guthrie. We had landed. We went home, and my dad had a heart attack.
Mm.
And anyway, Dr. McDonald told him what to do. Of course, I wouldn't know all, but he died the next morning.
Mm. Wow. And he was 50. And you said he was a little older than your mother, so
10
she was
years.
10 years.
10
So she
years.
was only 40.
Mm-hmm.
So she was widowed at a very young age, really. So that's interesting. Now that was called Marshfield Flying Club. That group of guys, I know I've read that, and certainly their headquarters was out there where the Main Course Cafe was, which was tore down for the dentist office recently. But it was on the west side of Elm Street, right, instead of the east side where the golf course is.
Mhm.
So you and Wanda Beckerdites started the Style Shop in 1950. Now Beckerdites had a store on the square.
They did.
Right.
They
Tell-
had come from Buffalo,
tell us that,
and
yeah.
they had a dime store,
Mhm.
and they were competitors to the one down on what's the street? We were just talking
Mary's Variety.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah.
But they both were wonderful people.
Yes.
Is all I can say.
And Beckerdites was right there by Shields.
Mhm.
Shields was on the
Yes,
corner,
Uh-huh.
then Beckerdites, and then the Style Shop, right? Or there was
No,
no Phelan's, yes.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah, which became
And
yours,
then
but not yet.
Then Earl Shields Pharmacy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I don't know whether I told you or not, Earl Shields came to my dad and asked him if he would be interested in buying or running his store, the drugstore, for a year. He said, I'm absolutely worn out. I don't have any help, and I need to get out of the business. So this is a little unusual. He took off for 1 year. My dad ran the store, hired a pharmacist, and it was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And then when he got his rest, Earl,
Came back.
it went right back in business.
So your dad had already sold the produce business to the
Yes.
mill, Marshfield Mill.
Mhm.
This was in the 40s. That is really interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
They sold Carinone cosmetics, and they sold Stover's. Had a nice store.
Nice store. And it was just
It
half
was
of,
on the end.
it was on the end, only half the building that it became
Mhm.
later. And then Beckerdites was in the other
That's right.
south half there, you might say.
That was a cafe.
Oh, it was?
Barnes Cafe. I think it was Barnes. then.
Before Beckerdites? Or-
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. I got you. And then later, Beckerdites built the new store on the north side of the square but only went to musical instruments.
What?
They only had instruments over there. They didn't have the dime
that's
store.
right. Didn't have anything to. Mhm.
So tell us about the Style Shop when you first got started and how did you go buy the merchandise, or did salesmen
I
come
was
around?
about as dumb as you can get. I didn't know a thing about it, but Wanda and I got along beautifully, and sometimes partners don't, but we got along, and we'd go back and forth to St. Louis to market, and Marshfield was good to us.
Yeah, it's great.
Loved every minute of it. Sorry I even had to sell.
Yeah. You
You're
became
not supposed to make people cry.
well. You, I tell you what, it's just a treasure. It's just really a wonderful thing to be here and listening to your life. It really is. Um, you became a member of a club. Tell us about that club.
Do Nothing Club.
Now wait a minute. The name of the club was
Do Nothing
Do
Club.
Nothing Club was
Uh-huh.
the name of the club. Okay.
Uh-huh.
I assume that you didn't do much.
We did a lot of talking.
But you had a good time.
A lot of talking. Oh.
So who all was in the club with you? Can you recall?
Dorothy Lashbrook.
Dorothy Birch,
Dorothy Phelan. Tell them, Susan, I'm getting choked up.
Dorothy Birchfield,
Mhm.
Marcella Baldwin,
Mm-hmm.
Etta Jean Waters, Ruth Day, Mildred Jarrett, Joanne Robertson. Should have brought a list.
I think his name, I can't remember,
Yeah,
Susan.
there was some more. I just can't think of them right off the top of my head. Pat Thompson later on.
Mhm.
Pat Foster, Pat Thompson later on.
Oh,
Margie McGrath,
what's the one down on the highway that had the,
Jackie Stapleton, but she was later on
yeah.
too.
And of course, a lot of their children were all about Susan and my age, and
Mhm.
we all know certainly. So clubs were popular amongst the women back in those days, weren't they? You mentioned your
Yes,
mother was a
my
member
mother
of the
was
club.
in Eudokia.
What was the name of it?
Eudokia.
Eudokia.
Mhm.
Okay.
It was Ray Phelan and
Marie Tyndall,
Marie Tyndall. I can't think of all of them.
Lucille Fian, Dola Mae Phelan, Virginia Mitchell, Nina Terrell, Bernice Cardwell, Gail Andrews, Elizabeth Foster, Bernice Hyde.
Mm-hmm. So I know my mother was a member of a club, and they called it the Samad Club.
Mm-hmm.
And if you spell Samad backwards, it's the word dames. I don't know whether their husbands came up with that or they did, but that was
Anyway,
popular for the ladies to have.
everybody had to have.
And you
been a
shared
club.
stories and shared
Enjoy
stories about
the
your
fellowship.
kids and swapped recipes and all those kinds of things.
That's right.
Had a good time. That's great. After a while, Bob was in the Sinclair. Or he sold the bus stop or the station out there, right? But he kept the Sinclair oil distributing business, the bulk business or the jobber business.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
About being in the business.
Yeah,
Well,
wasn't it?
Well,
it
he
was,
went to all the farmers
Mhm.
and filled their gas tanks up, and we had bought the station between Marshfield Motor and
The mill.
the mill.
forgot what I was going to say.
Now, for those that don't know, Marshfield Motor was on the corner there at
It
Jackson.
was on the corner, and
and
then there
Crittenden.
was a station right there,
Mhm.
which my grandpa Wingo ran for him,
Okay.
and my dad had a little office there, and then the mill was right next to that. Now what would you ask me?
I was just kind of laying the groundwork there for people to know what Bob did while you were running the style shop.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Wingo now, but now you're not. That's not the Northview Wingo.
No,
You
we
were
didn't
from
have any relatives at all around here.
from Buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Your Buffalo
yes.
area, yeah. So he had the bulk plant, and then a few years later he bought Felix.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
1970.
He said, "What would you think of? I would buy it," and I encouraged him. I said, "I'm right here. You can get the men's store, and I think you'll really like it." And he loved it. He didn't dislike it. He loved it. Of course, he liked to visit and so forth. And Susan, you can tell him about the boot business and the fellow.
Well, he sold Red Wing boots
Uh-huh.
and sold a lot of farm clothing,
Mhm.
like overalls, coveralls, Red Wing boots, Levi's, things like that.
I was going to have you tell about the Red Wing
He
men.
didn't mark up his things a lot because he felt like people were working class people, and he wanted them to to have a bargain on their clothing, and so he didn't mark his Red Wing boots up a lot. And one day the Red Wing salesman came to him, who he was from away from here, Columbia or somewhere, and he said, "I'm getting a lot of complaints from the other Red Wing dealers that you're selling your boots too cheap." And my dad said, "Well, let me tell you something." He said, "When I pay for those boots, if I want to give them away, I can give them away because I've already paid for them." And he never did, cross him again after he told him that.
Well, that's good. That's great. We failed to mention you have another daughter too, and a granddaughter. Tell
Yes,
about them.
yes.
Tell about.
Well, Sally was married to Dan Clemens, and
They had one daughter, Kim,
yeah,
who lives here
They're
now on the
back here.
farm.
Yeah.
on the farm.
Mm-hmm.
And Sally is older than Susan, and
Yes.
so you were raising those two girls when you had your store, and
Mhm.
Bob was still in the Sinclair business
My
then, I
mother
guess.
was alive there.
Your mother was still around. That's good. That's
She
good.
lived with us.
Oh, did she?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, she always lived with us.
Yeah.
That
Took care of us.
Yeah. That's awesome. And you built the new house there next to your folks' house on Washington Street.
uh-huh.
Right
That
across
was-
from Show Me.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
And
They're
who bought that from us? And we sold it.
show me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You've always been a member of the First Baptist Church in Marshfield, and I know church has been very important in your life.
Mhm.
That you and Bob attended.
My dad wouldn't let me go to the show on Sunday afternoon, and all my friends could. And I didn't like that a bit.
Do you have any memories from church? Any friends or family that you?
All of our friends.
Yeah,
were from
Sunday
East
school
Naturally.
clubs, or
Mhm.
yeah, any.
And most of the ones that I was in church with are gone. But I love my church, and there was a little apartment in the back of the Baptist church. And when Luther and Gladys Rogers were here, we'd always stay after church and visit. So I have fond memories of the
Sure.
old church.
Now Susan's a pretty good piano player.
What?
I hate to admit it, but Susan's a pretty good piano player. Can you
Well,
play?
Sally is too.
Can-
Sally
can you
plays
play
at
the
the
piano?
Christian church.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Can you play the piano?
Yeah, and she loved her
He
church
asked you
too.
if you could play the
Can you
piano.
play?
I didn't know why you were going to ask that.
Because everybody wants to know.
She took lessons from Lucille.
Did you?
Uh-huh.
Did you?
I had 3 pictures on the piano, one from Sally, one from Susan, and my mother's pictures there, isn't it? And mine
It skipped a
is-
generation when it came to her.
So
my
your mother
played out.
Your mother played, but you didn't play much, huh?
Well, she played, and she played any of the organs back. She didn't play the organ.
Uh
Would be gone. She would fill in.
Yeah.
But yes, we've got a lot of music there.
huh.
Not with me.
Well, speaking of professional actors or musicians, here's a picture of the Webster County Centennial that we'll show. This is the play that occurred down at the fairgrounds during that centennial time period. Susan, point out your dad. Your dad is
He's
there,
right
Bob,
here.
right
He's
here.
right
He's
there.
one of the actors.
And there's Jack Waters and Cecil Gander. Right there.
Awesome. But you weren't in the play, Matt. You were too busy running the store, weren't you? Well, so then Bob bought the men's store in '70, and so you both had your business there together.
That's
If I remember, you cut a hole in the wall,
Yeah,
a doorway,
we
so
did.
you were able to
Mhm.
help each other out, which is great.
Well, this was a time we would we went to St. Louis a lot, and we'd buy our merchandise. And before we would get our merchandise in, this is kind of interesting. Famous Bar or Macy's would get this in ahead of us, and we could see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, things were changing.
And we didn't want to sell.
Yeah.
But I told Susan, I said, "You're young enough. You need to get into something else, and we need to get out of this business."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and it's a sad time, but it was
Sure,
good
it was
time.
time. How long did you work with them, Susan?
25 years.
You worked 25 years there,
Mm-hmm.
and with both of them, and then after your dad passed with your mom.
Right. Well, right.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, they both got out of the stores before he passed away.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay.
in 2005.
Gotcha.
They got out.
Okay.
And he didn't pass away till about 4 years later.
Yeah.
So.
And so you built a new home out on the edge of town. Well, tell us about that, about the land and the farm.
Well, I remember Herman Pierce was in the bank, and he came to Bob and said, I know a piece of property that I think you could buy pretty cheap, and I think you'd like it. And so he went to the bank, bought our land out there, and
Held it for years.
Oh,
before they ever
there
built
was
it.
eight lots behind us. We
It
sold
joined the golf course.
And the house looks lovely to get. And wonderful neighbors. Everybody we sold to were kind of like family.
Yeah. You ended up selling that place then later.
Yes, yes.
And of course, you and Susan lived.
Well, we had a chance to buy the house next door. And we decided that after he died, I wasn't able to mow. Susan wanted to keep it, but we decided it was better to
Yeah.
downsize.
Yeah, you got a nice,
We
very nice
loved
home
it.
there. Yeah. So, any other memories that you can think of that, like growing up in Marshfield or travel? Did you all get to travel? You and Bob? I know you were busy in business. Did you do much traveling or?
My dad took his mother and my mother and me on several real nice trips. And that thing that she brought in, that picture, don't you remember when we were, and it had Chloe Lane in on the...
Oh, there was a friend at church that had been that had been on a trip up in the west somewhere, and there was a street named Chloe Lane. Of course, it wasn't related to us, but she took a picture of it.
She
thought
brought it
was
back and
funny.
showed it
Yeah.
to us.
Well, at least she didn't steal the street sign, I guess.
Yeah.
Susan, you got some other pictures there. The Derby pamphlet. Show.
Oh,
I'll pick up.
yeah. This was from their time when she rode the train to
So,
San Francisco.
and this is a picture of you all at the restaurant in San Francisco on their
And
first time together after they'd gotten married.
that's right.
When she rode the train.
Point them out there, Susan.
My
Right here.
dad and my
Yeah.
mom, and then his best friend in the Navy.
That's
And then
cool.
this was a picture outside of on the street somewhere in San Francisco. My dad and
It's neat. What else you got there?
this was the Eudokia Club with all of their husbands.
Your mother's club.
Clothes Club, and
Many people.
that
your
was
people
that
would-
picture was taken at Lucille Fiennes' home.
home.
Mm-hmm.
So this would have been maybe 50s.
Yeah,
maybe?
I'm not sure if it
Oh,
is.
here, January '58.
Mhm.
I like these old pictures. I just think they're
Mhm.
neat. Several of these folks went to our church as a kid growing up. I can remember some of them.
Mhm. This would have been Roy Tyndall and Gail Andrews and Orrin and Bernice Cardwell, Nina Terrell, Virginia Mitchell, Henry Phelan, Raymond Terrell, Ray Phelan. That was my grandmother, and she was the only one there without a husband. Dola Mae Phelan, Bernice Hyde, and Lucille, John Foster,
Elizabeth.
Bud Phelan, Bob Vian, Charlie Mitchell, Charlie Hyde, and Marie Tyndall, and Elizabeth Foster.
Wow. That's neat.
And this was a centennial, and that was my
Oh.
great grandmother.
Tell us about the centennial picture.
That was the all AOT club,
AOT, what's that stand?
all over town.
We would
All Over Town Club. This would have been the centennial, so, and this was your
Great grandmother.
great grandmother.
Uh-huh.
So
Lula Wingo, right there.
many of them would have been born before the turn of the century.
Nice is right there. That's Lucille, Diane, and Marty and Jane's
Mhm.
grandmother, Miss Jackson.
Mhm.
And they're all, I don't know if you could see, they're all holding a corn cob pipe in their hand for the.
Well, they had to keep up with the men's beard thing, right? That had
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I didn't tell you about the Depression time. I think I told you when I was talking to you about the people they couldn't pay for their feeding us, and my dad didn't press them, and anyway, he went broke. But there was 3 men that came to him and offered anything that he needed, he could have. So
To help him
Mhm.
kind of get back on his feet.
Forrest Lipscomb, Roy Tyndall, and Raymond Terrell.
And Raymond Terrell had the
Had
Chevrolet.
Mhm.
It came to Marshfield.
They lived with us 1 full year when they came here because they were going to build a new house, and that house is standing right across from Delpha Birchfield's house, that big old 2-story house.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Roy Tyndall had the grocery store,
That's
which
right.
that'd be John Bill Greer's father-in-law.
That's
and
right.
then Forrest Lipscomb had the big feed store in Springfield.
Mm-hmm.
Did Forrest have ties to
Marshfield?
Marshfield? Did Forrest have ties to Marshfield?
No.
Not really.
No.
Okay. But
It
he,
was through the feed business.
yeah, your dad had bought
Mhm.
feed through him. That's cool.
And they shipped 2 or 3 loads of St. Louis
Uh-huh.
every week. And the lady that had the Pearl Bell that had this little cafe, she had 2 sons, and they both drove a semi.
Mm-hmm. So he must have done pretty well getting back on his feet, and then
yes.
because
Well, and I could remember about, it was 25 years after that, he got a note in an envelope with $50 in it. It was some man that he didn't even think about
that owed him.
that was paying what he owed.
But that was during the Depression when all
Yeah.
that happened. Yeah, there was a lot of people that went broke in the
The
Depression.
poultry business was about the only thing that was making any
Mhm.
money.
Like tomatoes, there was some
Mhm,
tomato
mhm.
business going on. But
Mhm.
wow. Now, someone told me that you maybe, even though maybe you may not claim to be a great pianist, you can play another instrument.
A what?
Another instrument, musical instrument.
Oh, I was well established with the violin.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Tell us about that.
I couldn't play.
Well, now wait, that's not what I heard. I heard you were accomplished.
Well, they lied.
Oh, okay. Well, this person that told me that kind of could be known for telling a fib or
Yeah,
two.
I
That's
couldn't
right.
do that.
You probably know who that is.
Don't mention the name.
You
Very
took-
dear
You
friend.
did take violin lessons, though.
What?
You did take violin lessons.
Yes, I did. I didn't graduate.
You also took expression lessons.
Oh, I can tell you, that's the reason I speak so well. When
Well,
I
you do
was
speak
in
well.
high school, Pat Thompson and I both took expression lessons, and it was from Carmen Rainey, the Rex and Carmel, when they had the funeral home in
Mhm,
Marshfield
mhm.
back in those years.
Right.
And I can remember going up the steps, it's 2-story steps, and I had to walk right by the coffins that were in there. I was scared to death. I was a little kid and I was scared to death. But that was what.
Was that when it was across
Mhm.
from Jim and Wayne's there?
Mhm,
Okay. And then they built the rock castle.
That's right.
Yes.
But that's where they started.
Uh-huh. What else can you recall? Anything else that is of interest? I know probably sat here long enough we'd think of a lot of things, but we've got about 10 minutes left, and
Can
we
you
want
think of anything else?
Susan, you graduated in 1976, a year ahead of me,
Yes.
and after your career with your mom and dad in the business, when they sold, you went to work for Edward Jones.
I did. I did.
So,
But after high school, I went to college in Liberty, William Jewell.
hmm
Graduated up there. Um, Funny thing, Karen Hunt, who graduated with me,
hmm
sent me a little text this morning that she'd seen this, and she was telling all my friends. I was in a sorority, and there's about 9 or 10 of us that get together once a year at my house.
Is that the do
It's the-
nothing? Is that the do nothing?
It's the Do Nothing Club number 2.
The new do nothing club.
And they're all from Kansas City, and one from St. Louis, one from Harrisonville. But they come down to my house every year and spend the weekend. And we were all in sorority in college together.
Yeah.
But the highlight of the week in college was me getting my subscription to the Marshfield Mail, because everyone ran to my mailbox and they wanted to read it before I did, because they thought it was hilarious about what everybody was doing, and they were all
And
from
Karen was the
Marshfield.
only one from Marshfield,
Right,
probably.
right.
So the rest of them.
She was.
Well, maybe they were reading the bracken, the
Mhm.
bracken
Boomerangs.
boomerang brackens, or some of those country reports that used to be in the paper. Sometimes were kind of comical.
I thought
Somebody got a new chicken, and the rooster died or something, and
I told her this morning, I thought of something I didn't mention to you. When they brought the school buses in, see, back then, they didn't have the school buses, and the women, well,
That lived in the rural community.
oh,
They had to have some place to stay during the week while
and
they
we
went to
always
school.
had a girl, Ruth Davison from Elkland, and
Velma Rose.
Velma Rose.
Oh,
She
yeah.
lived with them.
And
she was a McElwain.
Mhm.
back away,
Mhm.
yes. I knew. Well, she lived with us.
Is that right?
Those
Huh.
girls all
Uh-huh.
they would go home on the weekend, but
Yeah.
during the week,
Yeah.
I know like Ray Phelan had one, and Marie Chindler had one. We all had people staying with us, and
Isn't that neat?
they were lovely,
Isn't that neat? Yeah.
and helped the woman of the house
hmm
keep house in order to live there during high school.
So, but was it like yellow school buses that brought them in, or did the
No,
parents
the
pay
school-
private?
That was all private.
I see.
They could. Well, I can't explain that.
Well, anyway, they had to have a place to live
Yeah,
while they went
sure,
to school.
sure, sure.
So they stayed with them, and then
Right.
they went home on the
But the
weekend.
buses didn't run daily, so they had to stay, and then only the
Mhm.
parents
Mhm.
somehow got them to
It was
town
a
on
good
Monday
time.
Yeah.
and back on Friday or something.
They were all
Yeah,
wonderful people to get acquainted with.
yeah.
They really were.
Of course, a lot of the kids only went through the 8th grade,
That's right.
and it only, I don't want to say privileged, but only those that were able to be able to get their kids to Marshfield to high school could, because there
Well,
wasn't.
they
yeah.
stayed with us. We always had somebody staying with us
Mm-hmm.
at that time.
You know, if you look back a few years before that, they had what they called the academies, like the Marshfield Academy or the Henderson Academy or whatever, and they
Yes.
were regional schools that, high schools, I guess. I mean, that's where kids would, after they graduated 8th grade, they would try to get them to an academy.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
But, interesting. Do you remember the Hosmer rock wall across the street over
Oh, yeah.
here? Tell us, what do you remember about
Well,
that?
I can remember the kids would come early to school so they could visit on the rock wall. They'd sit on the rock wall. And then it got so, well, the Hosmers didn't appreciate it too much, and you couldn't blame
Mr.
them.
Hosmer, I
Huh?
understand. Mr. Hosmer.
Yes, yes. Well, no, they didn't, they might not have liked it, but then
Yeah.
they didn't give them too much trouble. But then it got so they would play jokes on them, and they'd put oil or something
Yeah.
on them, and then they'd.
We've heard that. Axle
Mhm.
grease. or
That's
something.
right. That's right.
Oh, goodness. Can you recall any other stories from around the campus here, the school building itself, or
Well,
now there
I
was a
loved
music house out back. You
Yes,
remember
yes, that's where it
it?
was.
hmm
And
Did you
I
play
remember
sports?
working for H.H. McNabb,
hmm
and he's kind of gruff, but I was just crazy about it. He was so good to me, and I didn't like him when I went to his classes because he was an excellent math teacher, and that wasn't my
Wasn't
best
your thing.
subject. But he was a very good
Yeah.
superintendent, and Chris Beatty was the principal.
Of course, you needed math in your business later in
Mm-hmm.
your life, didn't you? Did you play any sports or do any? Was there any? Did you
No,
do
I
anything?
wasn't interested.
Yeah, I didn't know
Mhm.
how much what all they had for girls. I think they had volleyball, maybe.
No,
I don't know if they had any women's basketball back then or not, but it wasn't. If they did, it would have just been kind of within the school district, probably. But, well, I'm sure there's a lot more that if we sat here and thought for a minute that you could talk about. Susan, can you think of anything else we might want to touch on?
No, you covered the highlights, I think.
So we got 4 minutes, so why don't you just summarize, Pat, anything that, tell us what has been, obviously your marriage and your children, but what has been the highlight of your life, really? Beyond that, I mean, you're being in business, living in Marshfield, being born to the parent, you've had a wonderful life, I'll tell you.
Yes.
You really have.
I have never been hospitalized except when I had the girls. I
Really?
do not take any medication of any kind now.
That is remarkable.
So
Yeah.
I'm very blessed.
Yes.
Had a pretty good family.
Most of the time, right? Well, you can cook too. I know that for a fact. You can cook too.
Well, thank you.
Sounds like you had a lot of practice back in your
Yeah.
earlier days.
People don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
No, I can't think of
No,
anything.
she loved her work, loved her business more than anything, I think.
What?
You loved your work and you loved your business.
I really loved that drugstore. My dad had it a year, and I loved every minute of it. Loved the telephone where I worked, and I sure liked the style shop we had. I had tell them who worked for us.
May Lewis.
May Lewis.
Betty Colonna.
Dugan.
Francis Dugan in later years. Francis Dugan.
And
worked.
his
And Bob's right hand girl was Melba Young.
Melba Young.
And
Yeah.
then of course Gene Preddy, that's who Bob bought his interest out of at first. And Gene worked for many, many years for him.
Mm-hmm. And Bob bought the business from Henry Phelan.
Correct.
I can't think of anything. I'll go home and think of several things, but I can't think of anything now.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we'll do this again. You can write down some more things as you think of them. I don't know what I was going to ask you. I was told that there was a hamburger joint or two, like maybe on the old highway going out. Was there some place called Red's Hamburgers, or do you remember
No, I don't.
Red's? Okay.
Maybe they changed that Luganville name.
Well, that was this way.
Oh,
But I'm
okay.
talking about going out west.
No, I don't.
You don't recall that? Okay. I didn't know if you remember that or not. I heard others talk about going out there to get a hamburger with their dates or something, but and then no, because you had all these cafes on the square, but they're really, other than going to Luganville's, or I guess you could go on up towards Springfield, and there were hot spots along the way. But
I can say Ralph and Cecil Danza were our best friends, and we had coffee about every night, didn't we?
did you?
Yeah, and we moved up to having going to Springfield once a week at eating with
Yeah.
Ralph and Cecil.
Ralph owned the lumber yard.
Uh-huh.
Cecil worked at.
She worked at the style shop.
Yeah, she worked with you, didn't she?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I thought. Logan, it's about time. It is, isn't it? Well, Pat, thanks again. We're gonna do this again, okay?
Huh?
We'll do this again sometime. Not soon.
Okay.
Tell you what, we'll do it on your 100th birthday.
Okay.
All right.
That's fair
And
enough.
we'll celebrate Route 66 and Pat Abbott, who's lived on Route 66
There you
or
go.
worked on Route 66 business loop pretty much all your life, whether it was the cafe or the style shop. And
I
you
love
lived,
working
and
there.
then after you sold the business, you built your new home out on Route 66.
That's right.
So
Right.
got a lot of ties. So we'll make you the Marshfield Route 66 matriarch.
You go ahead.
For the centennial.
Name me anything you want to.
Thank you.
I've
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
it. We love you.
You too. Thank you. See y'all next week.